Well, hey everyone, Happy New Year. I hope everyone is doing well. We are here in our first new episode of Light in the D for 2022. And to kick off our first episode of the new year, I have a conversation with a friend who is also a pastor, Reverend Tyler Cronkright. Tyler is associate pastor along with senior pastor Jim Hill of Family of God, a Lutheran ministry committed to bringing the transformative power of the gospel to the lives of those living in Southwest Detroit. Tyler is also co-hosted with Pastor Hill of a podcast named Jesus, Dietrich, and Me. Now, we had a long and edifying conversation, so I made this one a two-parter. And in part one, Tyler's going to share the root of the gospel, why Jesus needed to become sin on our behalf, and hey, it's something new that I learned that I didn't know, plus one characteristic of God we tend to miss or dismiss. So without further ado, here is part one of my conversation with Reverend Tyler Cronkright. Tyler Cronkright, welcome to Light in the D. How does it feel, man? You pretty excited?
I've dreamed about this day, and I know that we've had some conversations about trying to get this. We started this conversation back in the end of summer, I think, right?
Yeah, it's been a few months.
Trying to get this on, and with just all the different things that are going on in my life, it's been kind of tough to work through that. But I'm glad to be here, and I noticed you've had a couple other guests on here, and I had to go ahead and grow my beard out.
Well, that's what I saw. I noticed that, and I did shave a little bit. I'm just doing this long Billy Goat goatee here thing.
Hey, you look good. I almost wore. It's funny. I almost wore my red flannel like that today.
You know what? I should have made that a requirement for you. But, so that being said, not I know you. We're friends, and I've gotten to know you over the last few years. Why don't you share with the audience who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So the Light in the D thing, I liked it because I'm a pastor. I get to be a pastor in Detroit, in the D, and I've been in the city for about 8 years, almost 9. It'll be 9 this year. I was talking with my wife the other day. I'm like, I can't believe that time is going by so fast. I'm going to be 30 this year. And I know that you're
rub it in, man.
A couple years removed from 30, but yeah, I'll be 30 this year. And I started at Family of God when I was 21. So I get to serve there at Family of God. I get to serve as another pastor at St. Stephen Lutheran Church in Southwest Detroit. The churches are about a mile and a half apart or so, and get to serve with my senior pastor, Pastor Jim Hill. And he's really kind of the guy that got me turned on to Dietrich Bonhoeffer and kind of the works of him and the Christian resistance and all that. And but really, what we get to do at Family of God, it's a church. If any of your audience is familiar with the Southwest Detroit area, we're at the corner of Verner and Central down there, in kind of between Mexican Town and Dearborn.
Yeah,
and most of our congregation, this neighborhood, first of all, it's riddled with drug addiction, with homelessness, with just general poverty. So a lot of most of our folks, I would say, you're lucky if you're getting, $600 to $800 a month from the government, from disability or whatever, SSI, whatever that may be. So most of our folks are living well below the poverty line. And then when you get into addiction and stuff, a lot of people don't understand typically unless you're, right with, like, you've experienced addiction firsthand, whether that's yourself or, someone in your family or your friends. If you haven't experienced that firsthand, you don't really know what addiction does to the body.
Right.
We can talk until we're blue in the face about what science says about addiction and what psychologists say about the psychology of addiction, but I don't think unless you've experienced it, you don't really truly know that. Yeah. And really what ends up happening is, for the heroin addict or the drug or the crack addict or even the alcoholic, you get to a point where you can't not manipulate, you can't not use your resources for that drug or for that vice. You can't not do those things because your body has told you, I need this. So what ends up happening is this money that they get, we can shame the addicts for, again, till we're blue in the face and say, well, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you should be doing this. Why can't you just stop doing what you're doing? Well, the reason is actually very simple. They can't. And there needs to be some compassion there. So we've got people that come to our church that are neck deep, eyeball deep in addiction, who have absolutely nothing because their disease has caused for them to spend all their resources on that disease. Right. And so now they have no need for, or they have no means to fulfill the other needs of life, right. Physical sustenance with food, hygiene, winter jackets, winter hats, winter gloves, things like that. And we get to provide that stuff for them. And we get to serve food 6 days out of the week. So today's Friday. So we have meals Sunday afternoons and then every night during the week. And people come in, the doors open about 2:00 in the afternoon, and they get to come in, hang out, drink coffee, be together. And then we have dinner usually served around 6:00. And then there's like a Bible study, worship service, or something else. Friday nights, we have Narcotics Anonymous meetings at 7:00. So it's pretty cool to be a part of that community. That community has taught me so much about, what it means to be a Christian.
I bet.
I mean, it's just like the incredible, the cliche thing that I think people say when they come back from a mission trip. And I don't know if you've been on any mission trips, John. But when people come back from mission trips, they always say, like, I'm so grateful for what I have. Like, I see what other people are living with and the conditions that other people are living in. And I'm just so grateful to have what I have. And for certain, there's a lot of truth to that. But I come home every night and I hug my wife and I'm like, I'm so grateful that I have you. I'm so grateful that I have, a house, even if it is a little drafty. There's a house, like there are people that live in abandoned houses that don't have any heat, any electricity. Yeah. And they're just grateful to have a blanket or to have a couple candles or to have just a single hot meal of food that, we might go to a restaurant and get a burger or get a steak. They're happy to get, tuna casserole or something like that, right. that we have there. And it's really good. The churches that provide the food they usually do a really, really, really good job of making sure that food is something that they would eat. Right. I think I mentioned this to you before. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people have an attitude of, well, it's good enough for them. And most of our congregations don't have that attitude. Yeah. Which is really good because it kind of keeps the dignity of, and kind of restores the dignity of our people. It's a breath of fresh air when somebody comes to me and they say, I'll ask Stacy, how are you doing? And she'll have a smile and she'll say, everything's going fabulous. I mean, that's, sure. That's a breath of fresh air. Cause a lot of times it's like, oh, pastor, you wouldn't believe what's going on. And it goes, and I've mentioned this to a lot of people. One of the things that you have to be careful with is if you ask somebody in our neighborhood or in our community how they're doing, you need to be prepared to hear actually how they're doing. It's not just we've minimalized the whole, hey, how you doing thing. I mean, I say that 3-4 times a day when I go to the gym. Hey, how you doing? How you doing? How you doing?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm fine. Like if you say that to somebody at Family of God, they're going to tell you, so-and-so died last week, or, I just lost my house, or I just lost this, that, and the other thing, or I've got this disease, or, you need to be prepared to hear and actually hear how they're doing. So don't just do this whole, how are you doing? And then just continue walking, because they actually want to tell you how they're doing. Right. Because no one else gives a damn about it. And if you actually say that to them, they're going to begin to think, okay, this person might care. This person might care enough to listen to me. And I think that we have an obligation as Christians to actually care. I mean, that's what that word compassion means. It's not just looking at people and just, saying, well, I'll pray for you, or right, trending on Twitter thoughts and prayers for X, Y, and Z. It's actually doing something about it. It's actually that, like I said, that word compassion in Greek is actually a biological term. It means that your guts hurt, your innards hurt, and then you can't not. It's kind of like being an addict. You can't not do something about it.
Yeah.
You have to, and that's the foundation for us as Christians as we serve. I would make a big argument. I actually wrote an article about this not too long ago. I'd actually make a big argument that it's the root of the gospel, that God, the God of the universe, looked at us and his heart broke and he couldn't not do something about it. So what does he do? Well, he becomes one of us. He becomes a sinner. He becomes a person. He stands in the place and becomes the greatest sinner of all time. He becomes the drug addict. He becomes the pedophile. He becomes the politician. He becomes the liar. He becomes the adulterer. He becomes all of these things and goes to the cross and is crucified so that people like you and I and everyone else, that family of God and everyone else that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, whoever believes in him will not die but have eternal life. And that's why we get to do what we do. That's why missions like Grace Centers of Hope, Family of God, all these missional congregations is to show that compassion that Christ has first shown to us.
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to ask you a theological question because I saw this debate online. You just said something that I saw a debate on this, and I'm torn on this. So you said you used the term Jesus became the sin, and I've heard others argue against that actually he took the penalty for our sin, but actually becoming the sin. So there's two different distinctions going on there and understandings of that. So is that how you see it? Is that he actually became the sin or he took the penalty for our sin?
So it's two sides of the same coin. So he obviously takes our sin. So there's the phrase that we like to use. I don't know how often that it gets used at your church, John, but I know that Pastor Hill and I really like to use the phrase "the Great Exchange." Have you heard that?
Yes.
So the Great Exchange is that Christ. That's what it is. Christ.
It's a propitiation, right?
The propitiation. So he becomes that great atonement, not just for our sin, but actually the sins of the world. The root word there actually relates to the cosmos. So he's actually talking about all of creation. All of creation will be redeemed.
Okay.
But when we talk about Jesus becoming sin, I would actually say that Jesus has to become sin. If Jesus does not become sin, if Jesus just simply, is the purity of God and just kind of puts on our sin like we put on our backpacks or put on our when you're getting out of your car and you're carrying all your grocery bags into the house and you're trying to get as many of those on your arm as you can because you don't want to make 2 trips.
Yeah.
So Jesus becoming sin is so much more than him just taking our grocery bags. He actually he steps up to the pool of grossness and sludge and toxicity and sin, and he dives head first into the sin. And when he is soaked to his bare bones in sin, when he has become sin for us, all of it, not just taking it from us, but becoming sin. And that's what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians. He who became sin, who knew no sin, so that we would become his righteousness. Yeah. So he takes on everything. He becomes everything. So it's two sides of the same coin. Yes, he certainly does take our sin, but in order for God's penalty to rain down on Jesus, he has to become sin. And we see evidence of this actually because God cannot look at sin.
Right.
So the Old Testament God cannot look at sin.
I know you're going with this, yeah.
And so, I mean, this is why when Moses asks God to show me your glory, he can't. He says, whoever looks upon the glory of God will die.
Yeah.
So he does not look at sin because God is holy. That's part of God's character. God is holy. We are not.
Right.
So God cannot look at sin. So when Jesus is on the cross and when he yells out and fulfilling those words of Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Yes.
And he turns his face from him. He cannot look at his son because at that moment in time, Jesus is sin. Jesus is the greatest sinner that ever walked the face of the earth. And that kind of gets a lot of people going. Because we like to, Jesus, Jesus is this perfect guy. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is pure. He's holy. And yes, but he's also at that moment in time, he is the greatest sinner. That's why, this Sunday in the traditional, Lutheran church, we talk about the baptism of Jesus. This is part of why Jesus is baptized is because he's standing in the Jordan River where so many sinful people stood. He stands there to become one of us, to become sin, and which needs to be forgiven. And so now when he's on the cross,
even though he lived a sinless life, but he still has to become that, and he does that on the cross.
Yes, he lives that
in that moment.
Yeah. So as Lutherans, we live in a lot of different tensions. So we live in the tension of law and gospel. We live in a tension of not yet, not now. We live in a tension of, yes, Jesus is the sinless Son of God, but yet Jesus is also the sinner when he's on the cross.
Okay.
Because if Jesus, here's the thing, if Jesus is not sin, if sin has not been put to death on the cross, then you and I are still in our sins.
Yes.
The penalty has not fully been paid because the penalty for sin is death. And so Jesus has to die. God has to die. And the only way that God can die is if he becomes man. We can't say, well, only the sinful part of Jesus died, or only the human nature part of Jesus died. It's all of Jesus, all sin, all divinity that's in Jesus. Jesus as God, as man, dies for you and for me. And then his resurrection is proof that God has accepted that payment. And now God looks at us and he doesn't just see, sometimes I think we see, we hear, when Jesus looks at John or Jesus looks at Tyler, he sees, his righteousness. Or when God looks at John, he sees Jesus. And like that, I see where you're saying, I see what people say and why they say that. But really what it is when Jesus looks at you, John, he doesn't see you and your sin. He sees you clothed with Christ's righteousness. So he sees you, he still sees you, but you are holy because Christ has made you holy because of what he has done for you on the cross. Does that make sense?
It does. I love that. I love your explanation. And like I said, I was kind of torn on this, but now the way from my layman's terms or layman's thinking, how I'm thinking about this right now. And I've heard a lot of apologists explain it this way, that, God is a righteous judge, right? And if Ray Comfort is one who talks about this. If you stand before a righteous judge and you're guilty of anything, you would expect the judge here in the United States, if you're guilty, to charge you with your guilt. Well, but here comes Jesus. He comes in. I always try to process that. I'm like, well, he's coming in, but he's innocent. But no, what he's actually doing is, say I murdered someone and I'm standing before a judge. I'm guilty for murder. Jesus comes in and takes the actual, I'm the murderer now.
Yeah.
Essentially. So
and then the judge,
I get the penalty.
The judge
for
looks
what
at
John
him
did
as the murderer. The judge looks at him and dishes out the punishment as if he's the murderer. It's not just, oh, you're going to take the punishment. It's no, you are going to become the murderer.
Right. Because no righteous judge. No righteous judge would allow someone just to walk in and go, hey, you know what? Tyler's the murderer here, but I'll take his penalty. They wouldn't do that.
Right.
Unless you actually became, or unless, that person actually became the murderer.
Right. And
I see. That makes sense.
What oftentimes gets, I gave a sermon about this last year, actually right around this time. I think I was helping out a church in my area out here. They were doing a series on like the characteristics of God. So typically when we think of characteristics of God, we think love, we think grace, we think mercy, we think all powerful, we think all knowing. We think all of these things, and those are all true. One of the things I did a Facebook survey. This is back when I had Facebook, and I did this Facebook survey. And I asked the question, what is the first word that you think of when you think of God? And everyone said, some people didn't understand the assignment, and they wrote a whole paragraph about what they thought about when they thought about God. But people would say love, people would say forgiveness, people would say mercy, people would say power. Not a single person out of almost 70 comments, not a single person said just.
Yeah.
Not a single person said that God is a just God. And I know that I kind of went to politicians there and kind of, fronted my agenda, but I said, because I said, what's the first word? And so, well, that's not the first thing that I think of. But no, I just, when we think of God, we don't typically think just, but God is a just God. And we see that God is a just God. And we see this at the cross because sin demands payment for sin.
Yeah.
Sin demands death. Death is the cost of sin. And God is just because God sends his son to die. God knows that there is a penalty for sin. So but God's grace is so much for us, and his love is so great for us that God sends his son to the cross. So I think about it this way: if you want to see how much God hates sin, look to the cross.
Yeah.
But if you want to see how much that God loves you, look to the cross.
Yeah.
Because at the cross, that's where you have law and where you have gospel, and they collide right there. And it's absolutely it's beautiful where it happens, because it's from that cross where we see the justice of God, where we see the grace of God and the mercy of God and the love of God, that it flows down from the cross in the form of the blood of Christ. And that's all been done for us. And it's marvelous.
It's beautiful. And that's the gospel right there, brother. We got the gospel in here.
Preacher's gonna preach, man. Preacher's gonna preach. I can't do that.
Coming up in part 2 of my conversation with Reverend Tyler Cronkright.
I know that there have been pushes within our churches in our state, actually, for there to be vaccinated services and unvaccinated services. I'm never going to do that. I don't think that's not right. It's not biblical.
No.
And if you are, I've said this on our podcast, if you are a pastor that is mandating for your congregation to be vaccinated, shame on you.
The word of Jericho will come.